and welcome back to Vacation Station TV, your virtual getaway. And yeah, she's with me again, and we are in Townsend at the Townsend Historical Center, and what a beautiful place this is, and we're here for a really special night. It's a trip back in time, back to the 1800s, and it's Christmas in the 1800s, and we're going to take you there. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Now, for a short while, you're just going to see lights, but we will be doing an interpretive tour with people from the 1800s. Yeah, they came back just for this video on Vacation Station TV. Not really, but what it is, it's a trip back in time to how Christmas would have been celebrated back in the 1800s in Townsend in the Smoky Mountains. And I think you're going to find this to be really delightful. Now, of course, it is dark, but when we go into the cabins, and if you look carefully, you'll see that they're candlelit. And if all goes well, it'll be as if we went back in time. Here we are, and I believe this is the Caldwell cabin. The hearth is lit. The table is set. There's the dinner table at Christmas. Simple.
Real food.
Yeah, this is all real. Homemade biscuits. That's what it's about here today. They're actually living in the 1800s. Molasses.
Oh, okay.
Biscuits. Like a hardtack biscuit. Something that was considered very rare. It was oranges in those days. Oh, I can smell them. They smell so good. With, looks like capers on them.
Oh, hey folks.
Hi.
You can stay behind. That'd be great. We just want you guys to stay back out here.
Well, I wanted to get a picture of that kitchen table because it looks so, and it smells so good. What's poked into the oranges? Are those capers?
Are cloves.
Cloves, that's the word I was
Yes.
looking for. Now, why were cloves put into those?
We still gotta have you back behind the road. They not only smell good, as you
Yeah,
just
there's no
figured
doubt they
out.
smell very good.
Yes, but it was also a form of decoration. So right now they're just kind of piled together. We had some kids out here, and I was some of the employees' kids were here, and we were just letting them play around with it. But they would have made decorations along here. So oranges are a winter fruit, despite what we think about the summertime. Oranges and lemons come into the winter time or spring, and they would have decorated throughout the house with these. Very fragrant, looks pretty, and it was also a sign of money to some degree.
Because they were hard to get, weren't they?
Right. Not everybody could afford to have.
Approximately, how much would an orange have cost in the 1800s?
I'm not really sure. Let's say that they cost 50 cents. Okay, just as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And the average man's wage is 5 cents.
Wow.
So it's gonna
Really
feed
a
his
lot.
family.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of times it would actually come as a gift from someone, like a family member maybe who had some money, or the local mayor of the time who had a little bit more money might be sharing with us.
How about the biscuits that I see?
Those are actually rolls. They're called rusk rolls.
Rusk rolls.
Yes, rusk. So it was whole wheat flour, rye flour, and it starts off like a normal bread, big loaf that you're going to make, but you make them into rolls. They cook up really dense, but they look like McMuffins, English muffins.
Did they have them back then, a McMuffin?
Well, they did not have a McMuffin, no McDonald's, but they had English muffins, obviously. And so this cooks up. It looks like an English muffin, but it's very dense. So it's not aerated like an English muffin is. And there would have been cheese sauce. We've been cleaning up, but you get cheese sauce on top of it and some homemade mustard.
Very nice. And molasses, I see.
The molasses was for the hasty pudding. So hasty pudding is going to be cornmeal, and you want to make it a little sweet. So you're going to pour molasses on top of it. Some of your Christmas songs take out figgy pudding and put hasty pudding on it.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And so that's why figgy pudding is sweet and hasty pudding only gets sweet when you add molasses to it.
Something I learned today. Very good. Now, how about the dinner that would have been prepared by you or the family? How would that start?
So this was tonight's dinner. You're always going to have a bread. They really loaded up on the type of carb. That way it would fill them up, make them feel fuller than they probably were. And tonight's was just a smaller meal that they would have had. So a lot of times they would have bigger meals in the daytime if they were entertaining people, and then smaller meals in the evening. If you're entertaining people, especially during a holiday, you're obviously going to have something bigger. But it starts off right there in that fireplace and the working table that you see right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And it started off with making the bread. And I moved on to the pastry dough for the pie. Then we started working on the ingredients for the pie while we're letting the bread sit up all day because it has to rise.
It's got to rise.
Active yeast.
Correct, yeah.
And then eventually once I finished the ingredients for the pie and put the pie in, I started making the bread, which was hanging in a hanging skillet, so it's not in the fire directly. Then we had the cheese sauce that we were making and the mustard. We made some homemade mustard and all that going on. And the hasty pudding is last because that can be made in 10 minutes or less.
Okay. Would they have had a meat during the meal, or
not this particular one. They did not always have meats. When you have when you're entertaining guests, you definitely pull out the whole meat. After that, you're making a pie with the meat.
Ooh.
So just like today, after you've had chicken, you might make chicken pot pie later on. And then after that, you might be cooking with the bones left over, making a broth for a soup, and so on and forth. And then you might go a day or two without having some meat, just focusing on some breads and some fatty products. You may even be using the fat from your meat to cook other things. So it gives it a flavor, but you don't have an actual meat.
but you get some protein out of it anyway?
Yes.
Very good. Very good. And would it have been a late night for them on Christmas, or they would have turned in a normal early and then get ready for chores in the morning?
I think it just all depended on where you lived and who you are. If you're a farmer, you're definitely turning in early and waking up early. Obviously, it gets darker around here around 5:30. So to us today, it's like, wow, it's only 5:30 and it's completely dark. And to them, it was, all right, well, it's time for dinner. So you're definitely living by the sun. But you could have stayed up the holidays. You definitely had more activities, and there's a little more leniency in how your day was done by that.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
And good evening. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Tell me what you're doing.
Okay, well, this is called hand spinning, and I'm taking some sheep's wool. This happens to be merino, and it's already been dyed. and I am spinning it into yarn.
Now, what would have this been used for once you're done spinning it?
Okay, well, you traditionally spin 2 bobbins. You spin them to the right, and then you take the 2 bobbins and you ply them together and spin them to the left. And then that will make a balanced yarn like what I have hanging up,
Right here.
which is suitable for knitting or crochet.
Which right here looks like a sweater of some
Shawl,
sort? A shawl?
yes.
And this would have
And
been, actually, is it made from here?
Yes, everything up there is hand spun.
You do this all?
I do.
What a crafty lady you are.
Well, thank you.
Very crafty. How long does it take you to get a spool of that?
Okay, it will take me a good 4 hours to do 1 bobbin.
So that's called a bobbin.
A bobbin. So it would take essentially 8 hours and then probably another 2 to ply them together.
Really? So there's quite a bit of time put into
A
it.
lot of time, yes. And you have to have your yarn or your thread before you can weave
Right.
to make your fabric.
Now, what about the dyeing? How long does that take? Because you have a lot of nice colors up there, but
Thank you.
that's not how it
Thank
came out there.
No, it's your wool is either white or black because that's the colors of the
Right.
sheep. And so you can dye it either before you start spinning or you can dye it after you've spun. But it's fun to spin color.
It is.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can kind of pick and choose the colors.
Right, exactly.
What did they use for a dye?
Well, there's natural dyes, which you can use the plants and things like that.
Berries and things
But
like
most people use acid dyes because the color is more
Acid
vibrant.
dyes? And what is
Yeah.
that made of?
Kind of like Easter egg dye,
Okay.
only a little more intense.
No, back in the 1800s,
It would have been plants.
it would plants, berries,
Yes.
things, whatever they could.
Walnuts.
Right.
Yeah, onion skins,
Really?
things like that. Yeah.
Onion skin?
Yeah,
What color
that's
do
how
you get from
your-
onion skin?
Your yellow.
Okay, oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And walnuts would be the brown, I'm
Brown.
assuming? And if you were choosing any other colors, did you have to mix them?
You could mix them. The interesting thing, you can take lichen, like what grows on rocks and
Yeah.
trees,
Oh, you can
and
use
that may
too.
turn out to be pink or orange or anything like that.
Very good. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
A wealth of knowledge.
Thank you.
Once again, we've taken a trip back in time on Vacation Station TV to the 1800s in the Smoky Mountains. And we are in the cabin of...
My name is Heather, and I am demonstrating domestic arts here in this cabin. Earlier today, the kids made ornaments and decorated the Christmas tree, and I'm staying up late working on, this will become a little hat for one of them for Christmas. So it's wool that has been spun pretty thickly, as you saw earlier.
Right.
And we're just working it up in a little knitted pattern into a hat.
Would that have been a typical Christmas gift for one of the children?
Sure, yeah, something useful, but a little bit special and a surprise.
And that would have been a good surprise,
Yeah.
right? Because the winters are quite chilly up here in the Smoky Mountains.
Yes, they are. It actually was really warm today. We almost didn't light a fire, and then all of a sudden the sun went down, and it is pretty brisk this
I
evening.
bet you're glad you lit that fire.
Absolutely.
And next week, it's going to be even colder. We're talking in the teens and the
Yes,
20s.
yeah.
So that's why we came up tonight.
Oh, good.
Well, because that's not roaring nearly enough for
No,
me.
it's not.
We're going to have to throw a few of these chairs in that fire.
We have a few that might be headed there soon.
I'll help you throw them in. So tell me a little bit about your life in the 1800s. What would you have done? Let's call this Christmas Day or Christmas Eve.
Sure.
What would you have done?
It would have been a lot like any other day. There still would have been chores to do, animals to take care of, meals to cook over the fire. Yeah, very much a typical day, but we probably would have taken just a little extra time to celebrate together. Maybe giving some gifts in the evening.
And I guess keeping the lifestyle that you had, pretty much the same, because you couldn't vary from it, because you still had chores.
Absolutely. There were still
things to do.
everyday things that needed to be done.
But you would take time to
Absolutely,
celebrate
yeah.
Christmas. Now, Christmas Eve would have been the most festive time, or Christmas morning?
It probably would have depended on the family and the community, perhaps depending on the church community that someone might have been involved in, or
Right.
whether there was one at all.
I turned it off.
Oops.
Stupid me. That's okay. We'll pick that up in a second. There we go. Repeat that again. Sorry.
So it may have been dependent on the community. So what church you went to, whether there was a church where you were living.
For instance, here, you're in the middle of nowhere. No neighbors, just you and your family. What would you have done?
Probably would have told your children the Christmas story. If you had a family Bible, you might have read from it. But it would have been just a quiet day at home, just like any other, with chores and
Pretty much another day.
yeah. Maybe some special food and some little gifts.
And then in the morning, back to work,
Absolutely.
because it doesn't wait.
Yeah.
The fire would be going all night long.
Yes.
And whose responsibility would to be to tend to the fire all night?
It would probably depend, and you can bank a fire so that the coals will last all evening, and just make sure that it's all set so that in the morning you can get it roaring.
Fire it
again.
up again.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to wake up to no fire in the morning.
No.
Not here.
Certainly not.
And the children would have been upstairs?
It depends on the family, but most likely you'd have your bedrooms upstairs, and you might all be in one room. This cabin is large enough that perhaps you had a dividing wall, but it was pretty common for folks to just use whatever space
Whatever you can
was
fit in.
available. Yeah, depending
Now-
on how many kids there were in the family.
Now, this is actually a traveling spot for people
Yes.
to come in.
That's what this building originally was.
Now, what would they have done? It's Christmas Eve. Travelers came in on foot or on horse. They would stay wherever they could stay. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And there would have been some sort of hot grub that would have been made.
There would have
something.
been a meal served up for everybody who was here, and then you would have bunked down wherever there was space available.
Wow.
You might share a bed with a new friend. You might roll out a sleeping
For 12.5
pallet.
cents.
Yeah, you might roll a sleeping pallet out in the corner or in front of
Right.
a fireplace.
And I'm sure
somewhere.
many did. They would take
Yeah.
it off the back of their horses, roll it out, and you curl up as close to the fire as you
Yeah,
could.
wherever you could find space.
And in the morning, was breakfast served, or was that just not part
I'm
of
not
the meal?
sure about this location specifically, but that might have been something that was provided as well. I think it really would depend on
The
the
people?
place that you had found to
Because
to
it's
lay
a
your head
room and
that night.
board for that night, but it
Right.
doesn't say in the morning you're going to get breakfast.
Right, so probably depended on
Couple
the
bucks
generosity
more.
of the innkeeper.
Right, the income. How generous are you? Well, I'm not
Yeah.
that generous today. It's kind of cold out
Maybe a
there.
little coffee.
Yeah, but always. Like, start the morning off with some real
That's
cowboy
right.
coffee, right? And this place would have had many people in it if they were traveling, even on the holidays, because they needed to get to their friends and their relatives. And the table itself would have had, I see 4 people, but if there were 6 or 8, they would just kind of sit wherever they went.
I would think so. There probably would be spare chairs on the porch, in the corners.
Just anywhere.
Yeah.
Because there's only so much room in the cabin, and I'm sure after hours, it gets pretty cold out there. Everyone wants to be in here.
Absolutely, yeah. And the cabin really would warm up pretty well with
Oh,
the
I'm sure.
fire going and a bunch of people
door
in
closed.
it. And the door closed. Yeah.
With the door open, it's not going to get that warm.
It would cozy up pretty quickly.
Very good. I want to thank you for talking with me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Back in time at the Townsend Historical Center. If you want to go back in time to the 1800s, or if you've ever had a question of what actually went on, how did they make their clothes, how did they live, how did they survive, this is how they survived. Your name?
Patty Benton.
And Patty, you're at the loom.
Yes, I am.
Tell me about the loom and how it was so important to everyday life up in the Smoky Mountains.
Well, what I am weaving right now is an example of overshot, which was a very popular pattern, the type of patterns that they used to make coverlets.
Called
here.
overshot?
Overshot. And they would make these coverlets out of wool for their beds. And because of the way the pattern is woven, it makes a very thick fabric. And so
What would that have been used for?
coverlets for beds,
Okay.
primarily. They could make tablecloths and other things with it. But the wool that they would raise sheep here,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would process the wool on the farm, and then they'd be able to weave with it. And they would weave rugs, they could weave curtains, they could weave tablecloths, use the wool to make heavy garments. In this area,
Coats or jackets.
coats or jackets. In this area, they raised cotton and flax for linen, and people had sheep for wool.
How important was it to have a loom in the family? And was it affordable for everybody?
Everybody did not have a loom. There were people who were weavers who would specifically, that would be their trade. And someone might process their wool and spin it and then bring it to someone and they would do the weaving. Typically,
Really?
men were weavers in the community.
Really?
Yes, women were hand spinners and men were
I didn't
weavers.
know that.
Now, on a small farm, or even in a community, someone may have a loom and they could take turns using the loom. But there's an example of a barn loom across the way in that cabin that would be the type of loom that someone would have. They mostly were good for rugs or just plain weave blankets.
Right.
But they couldn't do anything fancy like this loom does.
But this one, and it does look more fancy. And is that because of the way it's made, or was it designed specifically for that?
Well, a plain loom, like a rug loom, only has two shafts. This is called a shaft.
Okay.
And the shaft holds the heddles, and the yarn is
Heddles? It's called?
heddles, yes. And the yarn goes through the heddles. And the way you thread the heddles determines what your pattern is going to be.
Really?
The threading of the heddles plus the way the heddles are lifted. So on this pattern, I have this long list of the pattern that I'm treadling. So each time I press down on one of the pedals, it lifts a combination of the shafts.
Show me how that works.
Okay? So where I am right now is 4, 3, 3, 4. So I'm going to lift 4, 3, 3, 4, and that is going to make.
Remember this?
Well, that's why I have it broken down like that, because I can't remember it. So, and I have to move that little. So
What is that in your hand called? Is that
This
like
is
a
called
needle?
a shuttle.
A shuttle.
It has a bobbin that the yarn is woven around. So this is overshot. So with overshot, every other thread is part of the ground cloth, and that.
Now, what did that just do?
Okay, when I step on this treadle, it raises this shaft.
Right. Now
So
you're
when I
threading
raise that
that's
shaft,
what I'm looking
it creates a shed, and the shed is what you put your. Oh, I'm sorry.
okay.
What you put your yarn through.
And that's one thread at a time you're doing.
Yes.
How long does it take you to make something?
Well, if I am making one of these mug rugs,
Is that
or
what that's called, a
coasters,
mug
it's
rug?
called a mug rug. If I am weaving one of these at home with no distraction, it takes me about an hour to do the
Oh,
pattern.
that's not as bad as I thought. Oh, okay. I thought it was going to take a lot.
And if I was doing a larger piece, it really wouldn't take me that much longer to do a larger piece, because it only takes as long as it takes to throw the shuttle back and forth.
Really?
Yes, because, you know, doing that little pattern,
Mhm.
whether you're doing it this wide or this wide, it's just how long it takes the shuttle.
So if you're really
Back and
fast at
forth.
this, you can whip one of these out pretty quick.
Yes, but because it's a complicated pattern, you have to
Let me
think
see the
about it.
pattern. Move the shuttles. I want to get a close look at this. Oh, yeah, I can.
But
Look
if
at-
I was just doing a plain weave, which is just plain over, under,
What is
over,
this
under.
called?
This is called overshot. Knots and crosses is the pattern.
Knot and crosses.
Once you get up to 4 shafts, you can make, you know, like you're seeing, you know, you can make
That's
some
quite
very
intricate.
intricate patterns with a 4-shaft loom, which was common in the 1800s. And then the more shafts you have, The more money you had, the more stress. Yes, that's life.
It all comes down to money, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Right? Very good. Very, very good. Thank you for the information. It was wonderful.
You're welcome.
Now, this is the Smokehouse. After the first hard frost, the Smokehouse became a busy place. That's where meat for the family was cured and stored. In the Smoky Mountains, hogs were most common source of meat. The hog was killed with a swift blow to the head with a mallet or by shooting, then boiled in scalding water, scraped clean of hair. After butchering, the meat was either preserved by smoking or placed in a large trough with salt right over there. This is called the Smokehouse house. According to the former resident of the Smokehouse house, the houses were set so close to the railroad tracks that her family's daily routine was interrupted by the train carrying logs passing by. Fearing an accident from the rolling off of the train, the family would run from their home, and that's pretty cool, on the yard away from the tracks. Only after the train safely passed would they return to it. So I'm assuming this little cabin rumbled. It was so close to the train tracks. Look how nice the church looks with the candles in the window. Yeah, it feels good. I feel good. Now, of course, we've been at the church during the day, but we've never been to the church on Christmas Eve in the Smoky Mountains. Back in time to the 1800s, where you would have gone to church in the mornings, and it's got an automatic light, which I don't think they would have had in the 1800s, but it's nice. It's like walking through a little old town. We step back in time. There's no traffic. Listen, there's nothing. Very quiet. And the pathway is lit up with candles.
It feels like we went into a warp and we are the outsiders.
We're the outsiders looking in. We're voyeuring into the 1800s. Beautiful. Absolutely.
Hi.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this little tour. It was a quickie, but we wanted to take you here because these are the special places that we like to go. These are the places that Marie and I like to frequent because, you know, let's just call it the way it is. You know, you go, how often can you go to the tourist spots before you've seen everything in the tourist spots, right?
Right.
And this is not your typical tourist spot, but I invite everybody who's in town or coming into town, put this on your list, put this on your bucket list of places to see. The Townsend Heritage Center and the Townsend Visitor Center. They're about a quarter mile apart from each other. On the same side of the road, can't miss them, in Townsend. Beautiful town. What a beautiful little town this is. This is a sleeper town, folks. Just like Sevierville was at one time, just like Pigeon Forge was at one time, just like Gatlinburg was at one time. And what I can tell you is that somewhere in the future, this will not be a sleeper. There will be hotels everywhere. In fact, there are quite a few hotels here now. and there are restaurants popping up. There are really nice places to go. So all you have to do is plan. Come to Townsend. It's an easy drive from anywhere. 321 takes you right into Townsend. It dumps you out onto the main road here.
Look at how it looks.
Isn't it pretty? Isn't that nice? It's so laid back too. You know, we're not pressured by anything. There's no beeping cars and people crossing in front of you on the street. It's just nice and calm here. Thank you for joining us on Vacation Station TV, your virtual getaway. And of course, we will do it again very, very soon.